Hey everyone! Before I go into the topic of what this video is going to be, I just want to say it's raining right now where I am, or at least it was raining earlier. So if you hear any background noises of thunder or rain, hopefully it's just ambient noise. Today I want to go over the first phase of a commission I've been working on. I haven't been as active as I usually am, posting to my Instagram account, but at least this gives me a great opportunity to start a new playlist. To start on the background of this commission, I'm being commissioned by an old friend that I was in a student organization with in college, so it was really nice to connect again and just talk, and they were nice enough to see my Instagram account and ask for an illustration. So this illustration is going to be a gift, and they were initially inspired by one of their friends on Instagram. So I'll show that inspiration photo. It's really nice. It looks like it might have been made in Illustrator, but I can't be 100% sure. It might have been made in Photoshop, but it has these really stylistic curved cutout lines, and behind it the illustration of someone's face. And the person who commissioned me had a similar idea for a gift, but instead it was going to be a portrait of two people instead of just one person. So there were a couple of photos to choose from. There were three, and instead of that nice dark reddish brown earthy color, they were thinking a paler sage green or perhaps a blue. To initiate the first phase of this commission, it was really about getting the idea of this inspiration image and translating it to the specific case. Just edited the three images for color correction to make them larger so that the crop was easier to see the two figures. The person who commissioned me had a idea for a different set of arches or curved lines that they found. So they went ahead and sent me that inspiration picture, and you can see me here trying to mimic those shapes. Curves can be really tricky in Illustrator. Of course, you can use the circle tool, or the pen tool, but I don't know, sometimes it's really hard. I like curves to be almost exact, and Illustrator can be a little twitchy with that, so I ended up just creating rectangles and then with the A tool selecting corners and curving them in, and that seemed to work pretty alright. After I got the arches that I was looking for, I changed the shapes from solid fill to be outlines, and I just put a rectangle in the back, and then I used the Pathfinder tool to make cuts through everything, and then I selected the arches or the strips and I deleted them, just leaving the rest of the backing of those curves. We weren't sure at this point whether we were going to go with the green or the blue, so I wanted to create multiple mock-ups to visualize which one they might prefer. I did notice that it didn't look super great to have the lines intersecting the faces, and part of that, which was also noted later, was partially due to the lines that I created being so thick, or the strips. But at this point, I was just playing around with maybe cutting out the lines, having some of them go behind the figures while leaving other lines going in front of the figures. Of course, it was always a possibility that we could just do a traditional illustration and not do this line concept, but I really wanted to try and find a way for it to work. After doing the line cutouts for that first picture in the upper left, I went ahead and did the exact same approach to all the other ones. I'm just finishing up with this fourth green one over here. I preferred the first two photos instead of the third one, just because it shows both of their faces very clearly, and that's part of the fun of having someone do your illustration or do some piece of artwork for you, is being able to look at the face and go, oh, hey, that's me, or having other people who see it, friends or family, be like, hey, that's you. After getting back with those 4 rough drafts, it was decided that the original inspiration for the curves, while it was a good idea to show variation of different curves, the arches or they weren't as rainbow shaped as they would have liked them to be, since that was really the inspiration for the shapes in the first place. So since I was having some issues with curves, I actually just went and got a literal rainbow clip art or image off Google, and then I expanded it within Illustrator, and I just edited the lines using the direct selection tool to elongate the ends. And that ended up giving a much better curve with much thinner lines in between the curves, which I thought might salvage the look of having the lines go over the face. But again, I just didn't prefer that. I still liked it where the lines were going. Some of them were going behind the figures and some of them were going in front. But I left that final decision up to the person who's commissioning me. Eventually, we just left some of the lines to go behind the figures. So I did the exact same process as the first set of arches or template of the arches. I went ahead and just traced over the part of the figures that I wanted to be in front of the lines and clipped those sections off. What was also nice is I took the main photo that we decided we wanted to be for the illustration. I threw that into Photoshop again, and I put a mask over it so that the background was transparent. And that really helped visualize what the illustration was going to look like, because there really was never the intention to have the background to begin with. And because there wasn't going to be a background, the decision for the color that the background was going to be needed to happen. So there were two colors, one that was a brighter, paler blue, and another one that was a little closer to the foreground of the lines, that's a little darker and more muted. After those final 4 drafts, it was decided that the more casual looking picture was going to be the reference for the illustration, and the style of lines going in front or behind the figures was decided as well. So all that was left to do was phase 2 of the illustration. Phase 1 took 2 days, and I'm only going to be showing you 1 day of phase 2, which goes through the clothing and some of the skin. With the clothing, I surprisingly had a somewhat difficult time with that purplish, reddish purple shirt. It's a really beautiful color, but getting the tints and the shades right for that, it took some time. I cut out the footage because there's just so many other things to go over for this commission. Sometimes when you're creating a piece of art, even though you do have a direct reference, whether it's from life or a photograph, you have to ignore the reference, either because of your own capabilities or just take some artistic liberties to interpret. And I had to do that with the shirt. It bothers me a little bit because most of the time, trusting your eyes and trusting what you see. I remember in middle school, my art teacher, Miss Mulder, or Kirsten, right now she has a different last name from back then. It's been some time has passed, but I always remember her saying, you know, draw what your eyes see. And the first time I ever did that was drawing a portrait of a guy, and his hair was so complicated and hard for me to look at, process, and then draw. So that was the first time I'd really ever drawn just what my eyes saw, and I didn't question it. And by the end of that portrait, it was with pencil on paper. It was one of the best portraits I'd ever drawn up to that point. So, point being, I usually don't like to ignore drawing or illustrating what my eyes see, but in this case, it was driving me crazy. I had to just kind of interpret it, not have the reference photo up, and go over just what my eyes thought would make sense for a shirt. And shirts and cloth in general, I usually really love to illustrate fabric. And I first found that out in high school for my AP Studio Art drawing course. There was this really fun acrylic painting I did on cardboard, and it was pretty spooky. It was from the view of someone like being in their bed, and you could see the end of the bed and then a closet door open. And out of the closet door were these 3 figures that were draped in robes, and it was very white and blue and orange. So high contrast. And the cloth on the figures, I'd gotten reference images from weeping angels from stone sculptures of, you know, these amazing sculptors who sculpt fabric and it looks transparent and just going over human form. But that was the first time I'd really discovered that I loved illustrating or painting fabric. And then for the other person, their shirt or tank top had some lace or lace type fabric in it, and I did not want to illustrate that completely. I probably could have with a pattern or some kind of texture, but instead what I ended up doing is I created these lines and then I duplicated them and grouped them along one direction. And then I duplicated that group and rotated it so that it created this crisscross pattern. And I used that for a texture instead. Instead of trying to crop it very specifically, all I did was I sectioned off the piece of the cloth that I wanted that crisscross pattern to be. I made a duplicate of that cloth section, and then I just made that overall shape the mask over the crisscross pattern, both on the top and the bottom section. Then for the shadows on the purplish pink shirt, I usually save shadowing for the very end, but for this one I wanted it to be transparent or opaque to show through that pattern that we had just made. So I went ahead and did it early and just made it a purple color and then made it somewhat pale. And I think it turned out really, really well. That was the beginning of this commission process. I'm currently working on the faces and the hair. Faces and hair are obviously a lot harder to illustrate, so that's going to take some time. And I know I already said this on my Instagram account, but I'm also in the process of creating 2 fantasy creatures for illustrating. One of them is a picture that Nick, my boyfriend, he created it, I think he said in middle school, of a whale. It looks mechanical, it almost looks like a ship. And then the second fantasy illustration I'm also working on is for Mermaid. And if you don't know, Mermaid is just something that artists do, not necessarily just online, but I think the artist community, for the month of May, they create mermaid themed art. It's similar to the event of Inktober, where during the month of October, artists will create and celebrate art made through ink or ink prints or anything related to that. So that's all I have for you now, and thanks for watching.